Morning and welcome. Just welcome to Navigation in STEM, and we've got Dr. Sonny
You got it.
Natanielu.
Yes.
I've said that I've been practicing. And he's going to talk to us today about what inspires Sonny as students to connect with their rich cultural heritage while fostering essential STEM skills through their ocean voyaging innovations and achievements of their ancestors. Sonny was born in Samoa, raised in New Zealand, schooled in West Auckland. He recently spent 8 years doing a PhD, hence doctor, on a Samoan approach to Samoan approach to psychological resilience using traditional tattooing and traditional navigation. He completed it in 2020 and now runs a cultural consultancy. He delivers cultural intelligent workshops talking about the value of Indigenous wisdom for a modern society. He has done work with the All Blacks, the New Zealand Defence Force, a couple of Super Rugby teams, a few government organisations and several schools. And he's here to talk to us today. So join me in welcoming Dr. Sonny Natanielu.
Cool. Thank you. Hi everyone. Sonny Natanielu. The doctor part it's a PhD doctor, not a medical doctor. So please don't come to me with your knee problems. I can philosophize your pain with you. Where are we up to? Okay. So, born in Samoa, raised in New Zealand, a social worker by trade, and it wasn't until I got into the social work industry, primarily in crime prevention and in mental health care support, that I saw that the Western models of psychology that I'd learned to master at university were of no use when working with Pacific people. That's because Pacific people have a different way of doing life, different way of thinking about life, different priorities, and so the way we heal is different. And so after several decades working in the industry, and I had learned that the best way to learn how to work with criminals was to ask them the question, if I was to have stopped you coming down this road of crime, what should I have done and when should I have done it? They started to unpack their life stories to me, and I actually became quite popular amongst the criminal element out West Auckland. I became known as the one that listens to criminal stories. So people would come in off the streets, gang members would come in off the streets and ask for me just because they wanted to tell me their story, and even though they weren't in trouble or anything like that. So I collected a whole heap of stories, and I saw the value of cultural stories for them, and what cultural disconnection did to them that led to crime and violence and drugs and all of that, that a Samoan approach to psychological resilience or therapeutic practice needed to come from the islands itself. So that's what inspired the PhD. It's based on the premise in Western society, when you have knowledge, you write it down on a piece of paper, put the paper in the book, put the book in the library. If you want to learn, you go to the library and you read, or you go to school. But in our societies, we store our knowledge in song and dance, on our bodies, in the stars, on our voyaging canoes, in the forest. So if you want to learn about us, you voyage, you sing, you dance. That's our libraries. The body of oral traditions, that's our libraries. And so I made the premise that written on our bodies, traditional tattooing, is a type of Samoan approach to, or a Samoan psychology of pain. And it was while I was talking with one of the master tattooists that he said, everything on the body, everything that's tattooed on the body is to do with traditional navigation. So I added that to my thesis. I think I make the statement, I think of all the PhDs in the history of PhDs, I had the most fun. So I got to hear people's journeys about as to why they wanted to get tattooed. And then I also got to voyage out in the middle of the Pacific. And the thing with Samoa, the Apia harbour is so small. Once you get out of the harbour, very small harbour, but once you get out of the harbour, you are literally in the middle of the Pacific. And my first voyage around Samoa, when we lost sight of the island, when we lost sight of land, everything changes, your perspective changes. And it definitely made a huge impact on me, shifted so many things about me. And so I'm going to try and capture a lot of that. I'll try. And then I'll talk about the relevance of that in STEM education, or the project that I'm looking to do. And I guess one of the cool things about traditional navigation, traditional va'a making, is its intersection with wooden boats in the Western world, or wooden sea vessels. And in there, whatever differences we have in the Western world and in the indigenous world, it's the wooden sea vessels that we actually have in common. And so I got to learn a lot about the value of wooden sea vessels in our culture, and then its place in a modern society, but more so in connecting with non-Pacific people who have a tradition and history with wooden boats and wooden sea vessels. And so I want to talk about it, the science, the indigenous science of wooden boats or wooden sea vessels. Where am I going? I'm going to start with a guy by the name of Wade Davis. Wade Davis, Canadian anthropologist. A typical anthropological approach is you go and observe a people, an indigenous people, a native people for about 6 months, and you write about your observations, you get a PhD, and you're declared the expert on us, even though you didn't do anything with us, but then you become a doctor of something, and then you go to the university and become a professor. So that's a typical anthropological approach, an outside observation for several months. But what Wade Davis did, this Canadian anthropologist, the way he did his anthropology was he spent a long time with indigenous peoples. I think he spent between 2 to 5 years with different groups around the world, on all the continents. I think he spent a lot of time with about 11 different indigenous groups around the world. And he didn't just observe them, he lived with them, he did the things that they did. It was an immersive, participative type ethnography. And so he was doing this presentation in 2013, and so he said this, which is the key message of today that I want to pull through. He said, all of the peoples teach us that there are other ways of being, other ways of thinking, there are other ways of orienting yourself in social, spiritual, ecological space. What this fundamentally means then is that the other cultures of the world aren't failed attempts at being Western. They aren't failed attempts at being white. And I think that's important, especially when it comes to education. The education system is specifically built around a particular narrative, a particular structure, and particular institutions. And if you're not from that structure, from that world, then, I often talk about the negative education statistics that, politicians throw around. It's not really us being failures, but our failed attempts at being white. And I think if we change the way the curriculum is taught, which is what I'm going to be talking about a little bit later, then you'll see the stats change significantly. Not change the curriculum, just change the way the curriculum is taught. And what I'm going to hope to show is how scientific these wooden sea vessels are from our perspective. Wade Davis went on to say, before he started his this particular seminar, like I said, he'd been to 11 different, he spent time with 11 different peoples, native peoples. And he said, I want tonight to take you on some of these journeys that were so extraordinary. So he's just beginning his lecture. And let's begin by entering the largest culture sphere ever brought into being by the human imagination, Polynesia. Tens of thousands of islands flung like jewels upon the southern sea, the greatest culture sphere in the history of humanity. Indeed, if you took all of the genius that allowed us to put a man on the moon and applied it to an understanding of the ocean, what you would get is Polynesia. I found that astounding that he would make such a statement. I grew up in an education system not that long ago, a long time ago. that taught me that the Polynesian people, the native people, the people of the islands weren't intelligent. There's no such thing as traditional navigation. We didn't have the intelligence to do such a thing, and that our voyages around the Pacific Ocean was by paddling, which is why we're big and strong and why we're good at sport. And so one of the things I did when I finished school was I did waka ama just as a way to connect, because I'd become so disconnected from my culture. And so I did waka ama to make the connection. And as I was paddling around, Auckland Harbour and some of the races, I kept thinking, this is what my ancestors did. This is what my ancestors did. And then I come across this guy, Wade Davis, who makes this statement. Just before I came across Wade Davis, I was reading Dame Anne Salmon's, well-known New Zealand historian. I was reading her book about Captain Cook's encounter. She wrote her book, Trial of the Cannibal Dog, written from Captain Cook's diaries. And she was saying that when Captain Cook came across a Tahitian war canoe, Captain Cook noted that the Tahitian war canoe was bigger than the Endeavour. Let me just... So this is the Endeavour, a replica of the Endeavour. The Endeavour is about the size of a basketball court. As you can see, 3 masts. The bowsprit operates as a 4th mast and 50 million sails. It comes across the Tahitian war canoe. So this is a paddling war canoe, which is coastal. But the ocean war canoes, 2 masts, 2 sails. So first thing he notes was that the war canoe was bigger than the Endeavour. The Endeavour is about the size of a basketball court. And then Captain Cook wants to see his design up against the indigenous design. And Captain Cook notes for every 2 miles he sailed, the Tahitian war canoe sailed 3. So not only was it bigger, it was also faster. And that blew my mind, because I was learning this aged 40. This is not too long ago, a long time ago. I was learning this and I was thinking, how can I get to this age, when I started my master's, I was 40. How can I get to that age and only now just learn about the truth of me as a Pacific person? That we didn't paddle, we actually sailed, and the sailing was, the sailing vessels were actually faster and bigger than the Endeavour. And that blew my mind, because I just couldn't comprehend such a thing. And so I looked into that. Let me just backtrack a little bit. This is Dame Anne Salmon. She writes, according to current scholarly accounts, they came in a great migration, perhaps 5,000 years ago, rapidly moving across the Pacific from island to island and preceding the Viking oceanic explorations by about 2,000 years. This system of long-range exploration and settlement was made possible by fast, durable, outrigger or double canoes carrying perhaps 50 people or more and supplies for some weeks. So this is the voyaging canoes would carry about 50 people. The war canoes would carry about 150 people. A portable biota and a viral kinship system. Rather than a system of long-range control, this was a system of exploration and settlement by kin-based replication. So according to Dame Anne Salmon and a few other historians, we were out in the Pacific about 5,000 years ago. And so as you can see, the Pacific Ocean is about 1/3 of the world's global surface. That was our kingdom. To this day, still the biggest kingdom in the history of humankind. Whereas everyone's fighting over land, we occupy the ocean. And while everyone is fighting over land and trying to get more land and less land or whatever it is, splitting land, while all of that's happening, all of the land-based people, their innovation goes into buildings, housing, palisades, fortresses, all of that. That's where all of the innovation goes. Our innovation for these 5,000 years goes into creating sea vessels that can turn this massive ocean space into a highway that connects all the islands. So the different ways we learnt to construct our canoes, and the different ways of depicting that knowledge in different ways. And you heard Stan talk about the star map, and then the other parts of the Pacific talk about wind maps and wave piloting and wind engineering. So I'll get to talk a little bit about that. And so all of our innovation goes into creating these ways of tracking how to turn this massive ocean space into highways that connects all the islands. And so it's right that our sea vessels would outperform the European tall ships because that's our kingdom. That's our space. That's where we learn to figure out how to live in harmony with nature. Does that make sense? And so Captain Cook comes out into the Pacific and he notices that the language spoken up here in Hawaii is the same language spoken in Rapa Nui and same language spoken in Aotearoa. And he called us the most far-flung people he had ever encountered. He could horseback across Europe for a few days, cross a handful of different countries, and hear a handful of different languages, but he's out here in the Pacific, and the language, the unity of the language is incredible, and that the people that speak this language is all over this place here. In Samoa, the story I'm about to tell you, one of the nerdy things I had to do while I was doing my PhD was read the diaries of the missionaries that were in Samoa about 150 years ago. And the missionaries were saying, these Samoans have strange greeting customs. When they greet one another, they press noses. Of course, here in Aotearoa, you call it. In Aotearoa, you call it hongi. In Samoa, we say songi. And if I was to greet somebody of the same status as me, I would songi them nose to nose. If I was to greet somebody of a higher status than me, I would songi the back of their hand. And if I was to meet one of the kings, I would songi their feet. So according to the missionaries, we're the ones known for songi. Friends of mine in Solomons and Vanuatu, they wrote this a couple of years ago. They sent me messages. To this day, they still songi. It was something we all practiced. And so I'm making the case, we were one people that occupied the Pacific. I will come to the story of how we came to Aotearoa. I'll come to that in a minute. In Samoa, we have legends that talk about our association with Tonga. And what we're taught is that the Tongans ruled over Samoa for a few hundred years up until the rebellion. And then a small group of us found our way to Tonga in the mid-90s, and we got an audience with the king of the time, King Tauwhaahau Tupou IV. I think he's the grandfather of the current king of Tonga. And so we had an audience with the king, and he asked us, what do we know about the history of Samoa and Tonga? Me, thinking I knew something, I talked about, Samoa and Tonga. Tonga ruled Samoa for a few hundred years up until the rebellion. And the king said, the story of Tonga and Samoa is not one people ruling over another people. He said, the story of Samoa and Tonga is one people divided by class, a ruling class and a working class. He said, after a few generations of cruel leaders, the working class became a slave class, and what history tells us about slavery, rebellion always follows slavery. Nobody wants to be a slave. And so the rebellion was on, the rebellion was successful. And then the ruling class, they were based in Savaii, the big island of Samoa, that one there. They fled south. The islands they came to, they called south. The word for south in every Pacific language is Tonga. Even here in Aotearoa, Te Tai Tonga refers to the southern tribes. The ruling class, they were mainly based in the other island of Uporu, that one. They went north. The island they came to, the islands they came to, they named north. The word for north in every Pacific language, tokelau. In Samoa, we say to'elau. Here in Aotearoa, Te Tai Tokerau refers to the northern tribes. And then I was sharing this with a master navigator friend of mine last year, and he was saying, let me add something else to you. And he said, the story of up and down in the Western world is north and south. North is up, down is south. But in the ancient world, up and down was east and west. Sunrise, the sun rises from the east, so it's going up to the west. And so he said to me, north is Tokelau, yes. South is Tonga, yes. Raro Tonga, Lalo Tonga. Lalo means south. So Lalo means down. So down, remember down is east East is down, west is up. So Rarotonga, down south, is east-south. And if you look at where Rarotonga is, it is exactly east of Tonga. And so the names of the islands, all these names that you see now, are fairly recent constructions. We never saw ourselves, like the 13 islands that make up the Cook Islands, was never a thing. There's very little that connects all those islands of the Cook Islands, the 13 islands. Each island has its own language. In fact, the northernmost island of what's considered Cook Island, the northernmost island is Puka Puka. Puka Puka is actually, their language is actually closer to Samoa than it is to Rarotonga. In fact, when I heard some Puka Pukans converse, I could actually understand what they were saying. And so coming back to, the fact that these national boundaries we have today are fairly recent. Historically, there was no such boundaries. You were known by the island you lived on, not by the group of islands that the Western world came and said, oh, these islands are Cook Islands, these islands are Tahiti, when a lot of them actually have their own identity, but now because of the concept of nationalism, we have this thing of national identity. So the fact of being called Samoa, Tongan, Cook Island, Niue and all of that, those are fairly recent constructions. Before all of that, no such national identities existed. And it wasn't until I was doing my PhD on the traditional Samoan tattoo. And so the traditional Samoan tattoo, I remember, when the whole rugby league thing was up and everyone's got 685 and waving Samoan flags and Tongan flags. One of them asked me, bro, where's your flag? Because I didn't have a flag because it had run out. These guys had it all. They said, bro, where's your flag? And I said, oh, no, I don't wave my flag. I wear my flag. And he goes, oh, and then everybody gave me their flags. But the thing is, studying traditional Samoan tattooing, for me, I thought was part of, learning to be Samoan. And then when I started learning about traditional navigation, I saw that we actually have a history outside of being called Samoans and Tongans and Cook Island and all that. And when I looked at those histories, I saw that, I'm still proud to be Samoan, but there's also an identity beyond being called Samoan that I want to embrace, and I want to tell the rest of the Pacific people about it. And so there's all this stories about us being one people. And so Māori aren't Māori. Māori are us that came down here. We aren't us. We are Māori that said, oh, it's too cold down here, we're going back to the tropics. Different parts of Aotearoa, so Tainui and Te Arawa, they now accept that their waka came from one of the islands in the Cook Islands called Mauke, and then originally from one of the islands in Tahiti called Taha'a. One of the iwis in Taranaki, they believe their waka came from Rarotonga. Ngā Puhi believe their waka came from Savaii, the big island in Samoa. So different waka and different iwi are now accepting that their waka came from different parts of the Pacific. And so, let me go forward a bit. And so if we are all one people, the people of the Pacific, then what Captain Cook encountered should be seen everywhere around the Pacific. And sure enough, we see a lot of symmetry with the voyaging canoes around the Pacific. So in Tahiti, the war canoe is called pahi. Everyone say pahi. Pahi. The type of canoe it is, the twin hull, is called vakatipairua. Say it. One more time. Vakatipairua. In the Cook Islands, or Rarotonga, vakataurua. Vakataurua. In Aotearoa, wakahaurua. Wakahaurua. In Hawaii, va'akaulua. So in the Hawaiian language, the W is a V sound. Don't blame the Hawaiians, it was the English that wrote the alphabet. So the W is a V sound, so even though we say Hawaii, properly pronounced Hawaii. Va'akaulua. Va'akaulua. In Samoa, va'ataulua. Va'ataulua. You kind of see a pattern happening? And of course, Samoans have got to be extra. We also call it va'atele. Va'atele means big va'a. Of course, the Tongans don't want to be outdone. There's this Vakakaua. Vakakaua, also called Tongiaki. Tongiaki. And yeah, the Tongiaki was considered the biggest of all the voyaging canoes. And in Fiji, Indrua. So in the Fijian language, the D is an ND sound and you roll the R's. Indrua. Indrua. And then the Fijians turn up with a slightly different design. Up until the Fijians, all of our designs were twin hull. The Fijians have a double hull, which is asymmetric. One hull is bigger than the other. So the Tongans see what the Fijians have done, the Tongans copy it. And their version is called Kalia. Kalia. The Samoans see what the Tongans have done, and Samoan goes, thank you, we'll take that. Samoans call it Alia. Alia. But it's not cultural appropriation, it's big brother learning from little brother, learning from big brother, learning from little brother. Does that make sense? And so you can see the sail design. Captain Cook calls that crab claw design. The problem is a crab's claw has got nothing to do with navigation. But this is what happens when you let other people name these things for you. Eh? And so this actually imitates a bird's tail. In Samoa, we call this bird ngongosina. So the G is an NG sound, as in singer, not longer. Ngongosina. Ngongosina. In Māori, tara. Tara, which is the black-necked tern. So our ancestors observed that if the wind is blowing this way, and the sailors will know this, they could never fly into the wind. They're not strong enough. So the way they go into the wind is they go side to side. You know where I'm going with this now. When they go to make the turn, their tails take that shape. They make the turn, they close their tails, they bat the tail, that's their turbo boost, and then they take off in an angled direction to the wind. And then when they need to make the turn again, they open their tail, turn, close their tail, bat the tail, and then they take off. So the ngongosina does this, and also the frigate bird does this. In Samoa, atafa. Atafa. In Māori, kotaha. Kotaha, which is the frigate bird. Same thing. When they make the turn, and you can Google them. You can Google this, on YouTube. You'll see them every time they turn or they need to stabilize. You'll see their tails take the shape. This is where we get our sail design from. And so we are now capable of going into the wind by going side to side. And on the twin hull and triple hull, it's a lot more stable. So when you see the America's Cup on these catamarans doing tacking jaws, this is the granddaddy of it right here. Captain Cook takes that back, and now the tall ships are done away with because of the clunky design. They can't tack, they can't go into the wind. And so you see the European tall ships starts to fade, and they start to have a more simple design of 2 masts, 2 giant sails. And it was Captain Cook that took that back. And then Alston Best, who wrote extensively about Māori culture, he was observing a kalia, Tongan kalia, and he said the underside of the hull almost looks like the underside of a dolphin. And so we learnt from the master scientist herself, Mother Nature. Nature showed us how to design our voyaging sea vessels, which is why, of course, it would outperform the European tall ships, because our innovation, for 5,000 years, we watched how the birds do it, how the whales and all of that, the dolphins, the sharks. We saw what they could do in the ocean. So, of course, what's the best thing for us to do? Join them. The kuaka. Everyone say kuaka? Kuaka. In Samoa, we say tuli. Tuli. So, of course, the kuaka, for those who are familiar with the story of the kuaka, lives here in Aotearoa. And then at about March, April, here starts to get cold. And so the kuaka decide, nah, we out of here. En masse, they fly the coastline, they hug the coastline, stop in Japan for some sushi, and they carry on. They get up here to that point in Alaska. And that part in Alaska is almost identical to our summer. And so boyfriend kuaka, girlfriend kuaka, baby kuaka, food kuaka, and then about September, October, winter starts to settle in Alaska, and it's time to come back home. The kuaka do not go home the way they went. They do not come home the way they didn't went. They come home direct flight. It's the longest recorded non-stop flight of any migration bird. And so they fly over here, and on their pathway here, look at the first place they pass, Hawaii. So there's the ancient Hawaiians. There go the kuaka. This time of year, every year. I wonder where they're going. And then on the continued flight, the next place they pass is Samoa. The Samoans look up in the sky. The tuli fill the sky. The Samoans are going, there go the tuli. This time of year, every year. I wonder where they're going. So we knew there was a landmass here because the birds told us so. Does that make sense? Again, our science is from Mother Nature herself, the master scientist herself. And so we sent these explorations to see where are these birds going. Because there's two types of birds in navigation. There's the birds when they hatch, they go out at sea, they live out at sea, they sleep on the sea, they eat at sea. Their whole life is there. They only come back to land for mating season and hatching. And then there's the land-based birds, which is the kuaka and the other one I'm going to introduce to you. They are land-based birds. They hatch on land, but they like the seafood. So they go out at sea, they fish, and then about 2 hours before the sun sets, they need to go home. And so you see them flying up because they're looking for where home is. Where they fly, now you know where land is. So if you've kind of lost your way, you're looking for those ones that are looking to go home. Don't look for the low-flying ones because those are the sea-based birds. They will show you where food is, but they won't show you where land is, knowing your birds are. What am I up to? So the other one that Stan talked about, in the Cook Islands, Tahiti and Aotearoa, they call this koikoia. Koikoia. In Samoa, we say aleva. Aleva, which is the long-tailed cuckoo. And same thing, our people observed that from here, the koikoia flies this way, but they're forest birds, they're not seabirds. So they're going somewhere. And so we knew there was something down here because the birds told us so. There's another one that told us this. In Samoa, they have this poetic phrase for the ocean called Le Maota o Le Tafola, the home of the whales. And our ancestors observed that if you follow the whales, they will show you around their home. Yeah? And so we saw that in Tonga and Niue, that's where they mating season and baby season. That's the bedroom. That's the whale's bedroom. When we were voyaging in Samoa, we saw them there for the first time in about 150 years. We now know that that's their snack box. And if you follow the whales, we knew there was an ice pocket at the bottom because the whales told us so. So that's their kitchen. That's where they go to feed. It's a massive, those currents, underwater currents. Massive current that circles Antarctica. And so that's where the whales go to feed. That's their kitchen. And we noticed that on their way down to the kitchen, you'll know that the Kermadec Trench is over here. That's like a turbo boost. At a certain time of the year, that's a turbo boost for the whales on their way down to the kitchen. And as our ancestors followed the whales down, we noticed that they stopped in. And that's how we knew that there was a landmass here. So the story of Paikea and riding whales is the story of her ancestors following the whales down to the kitchen, noticing that on their way down to the kitchen, they stopped in at the pantry box, the home of the whales. So we knew there was a landmass here because the birds told us so, the whales told us so. And in order to be able to keep up with the whales along the current, the Kermadec current, we had to have a voyaging canoe design to be able to match their speed, which is why, of course, our sea vessels are going to outperform the European tall ships. So this is our science. This is how we learn. And so, what's my time? No, I don't have time to do that. Maybe I will. Okay, very quickly. So you would have seen this from Stan's one, the star map. And so there's the seven whare there. And everything in the sky rises in the east, sets in the west. And you'll notice that this quadrant here, the 7 whare there, are mirror imaged onto this quadrant here. So you've got haka, the house of haka here, the house of haka there, the house of manu here, the house of manu here. And so we know that the stars that rise out of the house of Ngā Rangi on the east sits in the same house of Ngā Rangi on the west. The stars that rise in the house of Kainga on the east sits in the same house of Kainga in the west. So now you can see the stars already give us latitude. Congratulations on GPS 50 years ago, well done. But this was possible 5,000 years ago because the stars already gave us longitude and latitude. You just had to have a lifestyle of observing nature at work. Does that make sense? And so this is how we knew where all the islands were. So every island, if you navigate at a certain time of the year, every island has a particular star that at its zenith point or at a particular time of night, you will know where that island is by where that star is. We ended up not doing this particular voyage, but we were looking to go from Samoa to Hawaii, up here somewhere. Normally, we would slingshot around Niue, head towards Raiatea in Tahiti, and then go north, normally. And that voyage is around October-ish because of the winds. But we were planning this trip in May. And so the captain said, we're going to go north, and then there's going to be this magical point in the ocean where we're going to turn right and then head towards Hawaii from there. And I said, how are we going to do that? And the master navigator said, we're looking for Polaris to go north. We're using Southern Cross to get triangulation. And we know that the moon follows the sun. So where the moon is, that's where west is. Does that make sense? So we can triangulate our direction using those particular stars. But the star we're looking for is called, in Hawaii, it's called Hokulea. Everyone say Hokulea. So that's the waka Hokulea is named after the star. And we know from Samoa, Hokulea rises in the house of Manu, sets in the house of Manu. And exactly what Stan was saying, one way to think of this is to project this image onto the horizon. You know that when the sun sets, there's our west, and then you start to map off these 7 houses, or the whole horizon. You start to map that off on the horizon from sunset. And then once you know which direction you're heading in, now you've figured out this imaginary point in the horizon you're going to sail towards. That's the commoner's way of thinking of the star map. The navigator's way, as Stan mentioned, is to put this star map onto the waka. So the waka represents, different parts of the waka represents different parts of this. So the lashing wasn't just to join certain pieces together, it was also to lash a particular pattern, so you know that this particular star is expected to rise here. And when this particular star rises, hits this part of the mast, hits this part of this, hits this part of that. Even the way the sheet lines were done was when this particular star falls into that gap, then that's the star we're looking for. So the whole waka was this 3D image of this. And so from that perspective, the waka becomes the center, and philosophically, the ocean moves beneath you, right? In reality, I know you're going there, but to help with your voyaging techniques, you put the waka, you put the star map on the waka, and then if you voyage well, you are standing still, and the ocean is moving beneath you. And so when you see an island in the horizon, you're not going to the island is coming to you. And so the way the island rises out of the ocean and comes to you, it's as if you had fished it up. So the stories of Maui fishing up islands, Maui isn't a fisherman, Maui is a master navigator, and sailing to islands, fishing up islands is navigator speak for voyaging to islands. Does that make sense? Now, from the perspective of the ocean, remember, our innovation goes here. So from the perspective of land, fishing up islands is nonsensical. What the heck? That must be one heck of a hook to fish up an island. from the perspective of land. But from the perspective of the ocean, fishing up islands makes perfect sense. From the perspective of the ocean, riding whales makes perfect sense. It only becomes nonsensical if you're trying to make sense of it from outside of that perspective. Remember what the very first thing I said, my very first PowerPoint page was about people who think differently, who understand differently, and who have mapped the world differently. Does that make sense? And so one of the problems with mapping, which is where they're struggling with interpreting Tupaya's map. Tupaya's the Tahitian master navigator who brought Captain Cook over. One of the reasons why they're having difficulty understanding Tupaya's map is that Tupaya had to think of this multidimensional world of the sky and all of that, the waves, the wind, the birds, and try and map that onto two-dimensional paper. And his struggle with it is why people are struggling to interpret it. He's got to try and map multidimensionality onto two-dimensionality. And so he's trying to put a lot of things onto one piece of paper, which is why a lot of people don't understand it. I have a theory. I won't talk about that theory because there's no time. But if I get time this year, I really want to get into that and make it clearer. I know a couple of German academics tried to write about that, but their problem is they try to write about it from an outside perspective. They never got into Tupaya's world. Tupaya was a priest and he was a master navigator. These two German scholars, they didn't get into the priestly world of Tupaya and they never voyaged. So there's no way they're going to understand how to make sense of Tupaya's map because Tupaya's trying to come from an indigenous perspective and trying to make it known for non-indigenous people. So hopefully I'll get a chance to do that later this year. Anyway, give me a couple of minutes to talk about this project that Okay, well, I do want some time for questions at the end. So the project I'm looking to do is, as you can hear, a lot of the science and a lot of the innovation that comes from voyaging and being on the ocean. So my project this year that I've been trying to get off the ground is using waka design and waka construction to teach the STEM subjects. STEM subjects don't make sense to us and we're doing terribly, Māori and Pacific, and we're doing terribly because the education system is trying to tell us how to learn about STEM using non-Indigenous ways of learning about STEM. But I think if the curriculum stays the same, just change the way it's taught. Instead of being locked in a classroom, come down to the waka, design. So now you have to think about design. You have to think about the physics of it. The physics of catching the wind, using the wind to give you momentum going in a particular direction. Now you've got trigonometry, you've got geometry, all of that, inertia, all of those physics principles, engineering principles, makes better sense when you've got something to relate it to. I was a nerd back in high school. I was one of the top maths and science students, and I can say about 90% of the maths that I learned to master this was before we were allowed calculators. 90% of the calculations I learned to master, I've never needed to use. But I think a lot of the students now, they don't see the value of maths. But if they were designing maths, one of the old, he was a teacher when he came out about 250 years ago, Thomas Kendall. And then he was forced to go back and train as a minister, came back as a minister. And he made the observation early on that the Māori 6-7-year-olds can't do basic maths. And he talked about the unintelligence of natives, that they can't add, they can't subtract, they can't multiply and divide. And then as he got into the world of Māori, he saw that these 10, 11, 12-year-olds were able to calculate angles off the horizon, using the stars and all of that. And so even though they couldn't do basic maths, they understood geometry and trigonometry and could make really quick trigonometrical calculations without any calculator or anything. And so that's because that was already embedded in their culture. So they couldn't do maths the way the Europeans wanted to do maths, but they had their own maths and ethnomathematics, ethnobotany, all those different ethnic approaches to modern knowledge. And so the project is designed to catch the Pacific students, use waka design and waka construction to teach the STEM subjects, because I think that'll make better sense for them. And one of the keys to our way of doing is, like I mentioned, using our ways of storing knowledge. So rather than storing it on paper in our heads, we actually store it on ourselves. So, sorry, Natia, I'm gonna point to you for a minute. So Natia has the traditional Samoan women's tattoo, which we call the malu. And one of the master tattooers said that the original malu, can I get you to show it off a little bit? Yeah, can you just lift your legs a little bit? And so it comes up to about here. And so now when you see the patterns of the malu, it's in columns, but everyone talks about their grandmother's malu looking significantly different. And the master tattooer said that the original malu was the original star map. We couldn't put it down on paper, and so we put it on the three-dimensionality of a woman's leg to mark latitude, longitude, and different things like that. Thank you. So Natia will be part of the panel in the next session after this. So you can catch some of those narratives and some of her voyages that she's done on the open ocean. And so marking how we store knowledge and how we use knowledge. And I think once the Pacific people get STEM subjects through that lens, I think that's how we're going to turn the STEM statistics that currently speak negatively about our inability to do those things. But I think the problem is not that we can't do it. The problem is the frames of references that are being used to try and make it make sense for us. Does it make sense? Okay. I'm not sure if I explained everything properly, so perhaps it's best that we do a bit of Q&A. Is that all right? Do we have a roving mic? Oh, here's a roving mic. Oh. Okay, you got
10 minutes.
5 minutes? 10 minutes. Go. None? Okay, cool, we're done, thank you. 10 minutes?
God, I'm a STEM teacher at Massey High, and we've just finished a project, Mokihi, I've called it, the Harakiki fast STEM rafts with sails. So I'd be very happy if you'd come out and talk with us.
Cool, yeah. I've been mainly working out South Auckland, and then just recently Sport Waitakere gave us some funds and said come out west, so we're out west, so yeah, let's talk a little bit.
Yeah, and I do exactly the same thing. I mean, I say we don't do maths, we just work stuff out.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. And the response to this project has been good.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah,
nice.
it makes sense. Well, one of the beautiful things about oral traditions is it's in the doing that you learn, that knowledge sticks. And so, reading it from a piece of paper, that's a tough ask. Possible, can still be done, but it's in the doing that things are remembered and things are known.
And I'd use the exact same words you've used in terms of connecting it to the Miracles Cup foilers. Yeah. It's all that trajectory.
Yeah.
Construction.
Yep.
What plans do you have for traditional boat building in that regard and today?
Yeah, that's it's a real troublesome question you ask. I actually had a design in mind 2 years ago, and I've had to press pause because I'm not yet sure where to land on the issue of modern materials in place of wood. There are some traditional stories to do with wood has a life in the forest, and then when you take the wood out of the forest and onto the ocean, it is still alive, and it still has a way of talking to you while you're out on the ocean. And so if wood has that characteristic of still being alive and still talking to us, what happens when we use fiberglass or non-wood materials? And I haven't been sure how to make sense of that, which is why I paused and just asked different Indigenous master va'a builders to their thoughts around that. And then if I do go down the road of modern materials, what do I lose? Like what customs and knowledges are now not stored on the va'a? And how can I find that reframed on a modern va'a? Traditional design, but modern materials. So I'm in that process. I had some really good conversations with Mimi George and Alison from the Marshall Islands at Hobart around that particular issue. So I'm becoming more and more settled. The need to use modern materials, especially in such a damaged environment. So one of the things that Stan alluded to was the complementarity between the seasons of voyaging in the ocean and the seasons of harvest and land. And the seasons we never voyaged whenever we wanted. It was always seasonal, depending on the stars we wanted to go and the place we wanted to go to. And we would only voyage if the crop was plentiful, because we didn't want to take everything and then leave home starving. We always made sure that home was looked after, so that when we voyaged and came back, home was still there. So there's this complementarity between the land seasons and the voyaging seasons. And so because of the damage humans have done to the environment, I'm mindful of not wanting to affect that too much by having all the schools, chopping down trees and building va'a. And so I think I have to go down the road of modern materials, but then working with a different group of people now around what do we lose in using modern materials and how can we bring that back with this new version of traditional va'a. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the same conversation is had with the classic yacht community with the modern boats.
Yeah.
You're talking about vessels that are 3,000, 5,000-year-old designs. We're talking about ones that are over 100 years old, 140 for one of our boats, Jesse Logan, and the core was, would the Logans and Baileys, the boat builders, have used modern materials if they were available to them at that time? Yeah. And so that's a challenging question that's got both sides of it, as you quite rightly explained.
Yeah. I think the school would be a whole lot more fun doing it this way. So the basic formula is a third of the class, a third of the time in a classroom, a third of the time building a va'a, and a third of the time in the plantation, so that you learn all of it. And then there's an appreciation for wood and va'a design. And then if you're going to replace wood with the modern material, at least you know what you're going to replace it with and the story that needs to go with that replacement. But I think each locality and region can define that for themselves because they will have their own stories and their own knowledges they will want to pass on. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Very much so. Yeah.
Sonny,
It's on.
there's an Australian fellow who operates under the moniker Harry Proa. He designs proas. So he's now set up in Fiji.
Oh, yeah.
And he makes modern materials on a flat table, and just for the speed and economy of the labour involved, and looking at sort of trying to challenge the dependence on outboard motors and the failures.
And so one of the questions, one of the issues that I've been trying to make sense of is the steering paddle is big and heavy, but it helps anchor the canoe. And so if I go for a lighter material, like a type of carbon fiber, it's a lot lighter, but probably stronger. That will be really good for steering out in the harbour here. But then now that it's lighter, what do I lose? I lose the weight. I lose perhaps the centre of anchor. And so then how do I make up for that? And then in changing the stories that are now, that go with the changes, what stories do I add to be able to make sense, all of that stuff. So it's a long process, still a lot of work in process, but I think a lot of those narratives, the schools can start to personalize and itemize, and then different parts of the waka can be different things to the different schools. And I think that's the road I think I'm going to go down. I still got a bit of time to settle on that, but that's kind of my current thinking. And then it makes navigation a lot more relevant, a lot more real, and then it makes connecting to the traditional knowledges a lot more, more kids will want to connect in that regard. Does that make sense? We done? Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. I hope it was useful. I hope it was meaningful for you. If you do want to chat a little bit, I think we're here for a little bit before the next session is up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sonny. I'm going to add to some of that knowledge that has just been shared. So in New Zealand, we have a really incredible New Zealand marine industry, and they can definitely help with some of those questions. Hearing, as you say, if you go to a carbon fibre hoi, you need the weight.
Yeah.
So that can be solved. There's incredible naval architects in New Zealand as well. There's incredible, like the high performance, but also materials. And then there's also having this conversation just yesterday with Cookie at the Percy Voss shed, who is also looking at building boats, who's also looking at something to, and just talking to Stan as well. He's about to go and have a conversation on Hawaii. So there's definitely a groundswell of this conversation. It has been going on for a long time. I feel through, thankfully, you saying yes and others, that we are getting a very clear picture. So you don't have to do this on your own.
Yeah.
There is a group there. We know, as I say, lots of people in the marine industry who would love to be part of this problem solving as well, and this solution finding. And it just makes my heart sing that we're actually having these conversations now. So thank you for asking that question, Tony. Thank you for sharing that extra bit of your project and your vision for the future. Fabulous to hear that there are teachers here and what is happening in the education system as well. And we've got some young tamariki here who I noticed were on phones at the beginning but weren't at the end. So thank you very much for making the time to come here as well and be part of this conversation. I have a gift for you for your sailing. It did have a book in it. I gave the book to Stan because I'm sure that there was a book in the bookshop, but somebody's bought it. So I've got a book to give to you as well as this.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
But also to invite you through the New Zealand Sailing Trust, which Tony is chairman of as well. It is a conversation we have started before. I am very keen to put some dates in around that. Cool. To invite yourself and some of your students out to come. We've got so much knowledge that can be shared, and this is just the start of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.